All right, hello and welcome everybody. Welcome back to Animal Imaginatomy. We're here now in week 3. So, just to recap really quick, I always like doing these little recaps because these lessons build on top of each other, and it's important to acknowledge that, right? So, if we're mindful that the lessons we're going into are building on top of the previous lessons that we already have covered, we'll be a little more prepared to absorb this information. So, week 1, we dealt with construction forms. We worked to understand those 3 main construction forms and how the limbs attach to the body. Week 2, we went ahead and expanded on that idea, right? We talked a little bit more about how those limbs connect to the body, how to go ahead and alter those limbs, starting to learn to move them in different ways, and we also learned how to stretch and pull those forms, right? To take those forms, maintain their structural integrity, but go ahead and change those proportions, push them to different proportions, stretch them, squash them, so we can use them to get more extreme forms or more interesting creature designs. Now, last week we also really briefly touched on head construction. This week we'll be building off of that. We will be focusing primarily on head construction this week, and by primarily I mean entirely. We'll be focusing entirely on head construction this week, and we'll be doing it with 3 different types of creature head constructions. One, we are going to have a prey species. 2, we are going to have a canid, and 3, we will have a feline. So for the prey species is kind of I know it's a really generic umbrella because you do have a lot of different specific creatures that fall underneath there, right? So anything from, deer to even rabbits are considered prey species sometimes. But what we're talking about specifically are going to be mammalian quadrupeds that kind of follow that ungulate formula, right? That hoofed mammal formula. So for our prey species, what we're going to be utilizing is we're going to be utilizing a horse for our prey species here, an equine. So the first thing to remember here, we're going to go ahead and just begin off with that prey species demo right now. As I mentioned, we've got 3 demos here that we're going through, so we're going to move a little quick today. So for number 1, for the prey species, the big thing to keep in mind with ungulates and grazers, like we were talking about in the previous weeks, this falls under, equines, giraffes fall under this umbrella. What we want to do is make sure those eyes are pointing out to the sides, right? So really quick here, I'm going to make the big notes that we're going to be covering. So for prey species, we want to get that side eye on them, right? We want to get those sideways facing eyes. And we're going to do that through utilizing this tube abstraction. That's going to help us keep those eyes facing out to the sides. For the canid, the big thing that we need to remember are the forward-facing eyes. So on the canid, we're going to utilize a box abstraction. Get this a little bigger here for us. We're going to be utilizing a box abstraction to keep those eyes facing forward. Now, for our feline friend, we are going to do the forward-facing eyes and the soft tissue around the jaw. All right, so let's go ahead and hop into these 3 demos. Number 1, we're going to go ahead and tackle our prey species, our ungulate, our equine, our horse. So the big thing, as I mentioned, are going to be those sideways facing eyes. Now, to get those eyes, what we need to have happen is we need a flatter plane to kind of keep those eyes pointing out towards the side, something to kind of anchor that tube shape into. So what I like to start with here, just excuse me, still getting over that little cough I had, so feeling much better. So thank you all for your patience with the critiques. But if I do have a little bit of a cough here, that's just me getting over that cold. Again, everyone here is safe. We all tested negative PCR tests and all. But just letting you know in case I have the cough going. But anyways, what I like to do is start this forward trajectory, right? Where I have this nice slanted flat plane coming down, and I'm finding the back of the head here now for that horse. Right here at the base of the skull. And then I'm just going to kind of drop this down here into sort of a kite shape, or what one of my students pointed out and kind of might help you guys remember it, almost like a coffin lid, right? We're going into October here. We can use our spooky comparisons. So yeah, kind of almost like a coffin or casket lid, where you've got this shape here, and you can help remember it by prey species. Well, they get eaten, right? So we have this shape here for the top of their head. So we're going to pull that on down, and that's going to be the basis of what we're starting here. Now, I'm going to add a couple more planes, just a little bit of a triangular side plane here, and that'll alter as we go. But I'm just blocking in, basically the shape of the horse's head here. Now, to get those eyes, what we're going to do, this little connection point right across here, right? This little horizontal that's going across, kind of the crossbar on our kite, or the little horizontal width on our casket, whichever way you want to think of it. We're going to utilize that to help us place that tube. Remember that tube up here? That's what we're doing now. And as I mentioned, that tube goes all the way across, and it helps keep those eyes facing outwards. Now, why do they have those outward facing eyes? You guys know that I'm a huge proponent of understanding the why behind the structure, right? Because if you understand that, you then kind of file that information away, and you watch for it when you're drawing. You make sure to get that in there. So the reason they have these sideways facing eyes is it gives them a much wider field of vision. These guys can kind of see basically like this, right? They have a very wide field of vision that they can see in, which helps them spot predators coming at them, right? This is how they stay alive out there. Remember that every adaptation that these creatures are going to have, any creature, whether it's a predator, whether it's a prey species, whether it's a stalker, whether it's a runner, whether it's a real world creature or a fantasy creature, all of these creatures have three things in common. They have all the features that they have. Let me rephrase that. All the features that they have are there for three specific reasons. One of three reasons. It's either to get food for them, to keep them from becoming food, or to reproduce. And there's overlap with a lot of those things too. Nature likes to kind of double up on on items. It doesn't like to waste energy, So, for instance, we'll use the example of the giraffe, right? That we utilized in last week's demo. The giraffe is a creature that has a crazy long neck, an adaptation that's used to get food, but it also uses that to fight off rivals. So it uses that for reproductive purposes as well, to kind of prove their stamina. The males use that neck to kind of slam into others, kind of like a giant flail almost. So nature likes to double up. Anyways, getting back to the horse here, we got our sideways facing eyes to watch for that wider field of vision, watch for those predators, our casket shape on the top, and now going from here, what I like to do next is establish that masseter muscle. So on most horses, and on your reference today for your homework, which I'll get to towards the end of class, you'll be able to see this as well. We get this little ridge that comes on down here that kind of hooks up with the zygomatic arch behind the horse's eye. And this ridge is where the masseter muscle is going to attach. The masseter muscle is that large slab-like muscle at the corner of a horse's jaw, kind of at the far back corner of their head here, right here, this whole big area right there. That's our masseter muscle. It's that big slab-like cheek that sort of gives it that iconic profile. So I want to go ahead and find that. It anchors, like I said, right up to this ridge right here. So I'm establishing that plane in, and then we can pull from right about, you see there's a little corner right here. I'm pulling a straight out from that corner. This straight right here is kind of the true mandible. That's the jawbone, right? There's not much on top of that except for some skin and tissue. There's not like a lot of muscle or fat or anything on that. So it's very close to the actual bone there. So this is the mandible coming down here. And then as we come forward, if you're looking at your reference, you're going to see that little dip that happens right here where we start to get to the mouth, to the muzzle. Now, to keep that from getting too wonky, it's an area that has a lot of soft tissue in it. And whenever we're dealing with an area that has a ton of soft tissue in there, what we need to do is find the structure first. So it's very tempting when you get to an area like that mouth and nose and muzzle and whatnot, to come in here and kind of try to find where the nostril placement is, to find the mouth placement and everything, but it gets too noodly and we lose structure that way. So what we need to do is establish that structure first and then go ahead and find those softer angles in there. So I like to try to find, I'm sorry, then go in and try to round out those angles and soften those angles. I like to start off with kind of more firm angles and construction in here. So what I begin with is a really solid orb, right? And I'll show you what we're going to do. It's a very nuanced back and forth for the muzzle area on these horses. Now, different ungulate species are going to have different kind of shapes for this muzzle area. So for the horse, for instance, I like to begin with a sphere, and then I'll just draw that center line, pull that same center line that we had here, right? We're going to pull that right down the front of that sphere and just wrap it around there so it firmly anchors it onto the rest of the head. Now, with other ungulate species, like I was saying before, they have slightly different shapes. With the horse, it's more of a sphere. And I'm going to show you how now we're going to start chiseling that out to get more flat planes and then rounding those planes back out again. So starting more fluid, getting more boxy, then going back to more fluid. I'm going to show you that in just a moment here. But before we get into that, I'm just going to show you really quick how you can alter it for other species. So the giraffe last week has this more of a point to its lips, right? We can go ahead and establish that sphere and then just pull that on out, pull that point on out of there, right? And then we have something that's more akin to a browser's lip, something like a giraffe or maybe a black rhino. In this instance, though, we have a grazer. What's the difference between a browser and a grazer? So browsers are going for stuff that's a little higher off the ground. They're using something like a prehensile tongue or a prehensile lip to wrap around those leaves and pull it into their mouth. Grazers, on the other hand, are more of like lawnmowers, right? They have sort of a flatter mouth surface that when you put it down to the ground kind of fits perfectly and flat to the ground so they can kind of chew off that grass. Things like horses, white rhinos are a great example of another grazer. So they have a little more flatter surface where the mouth makes contact. And I'm going to show you how we're going to get that right now. I already showed you how we're going to get the browser. Now let's go ahead and show you the grazer. So on this, what we're going to do, we have our sphere established, right? What I'm going to do now is chisel off some planes. So I'm going to think of it like a clay ball and like we're taking a knife and slicing off a couple planes on this. So the first slice of this plane is going to be right here, right where that orb is meeting the head construction. And we're just going to slice that off. I'm actually going to ghost out that little center line. I like to establish that center line early to make sure that the orb is lined up and centered. But just as with any construction line, once you get to a certain point, you have to say goodbye to it. And right now that it's centered, I can say goodbye and start really chiseling out this muzzle. So we get a little plane change here. Coming down, we're going to get a little more of a plane change. And then we get this dramatic one that happens as it drops backwards. This dramatic plane change back here, this plane right there, if this horse were to lower its head down to the ground, this plane would be sitting right on that grass. That's how you want to kind of think of it, right? Remember the structure of these animals and how they survive, because that is going to inform our drawings. And then as we come back, we can go ahead and loop this mouth up. You can see here now I'm following the contour that I've established with that orb. That's why it's important to get that orb in there and centered correctly. Because while we will go ahead and plank some areas out here, chisel some areas off, we also are going to have some areas that follow the contours of that orb. So it's a very complex back and forth kind of dance here. And what we're going to do here, I want you to pay attention to this little area here. What we're going to do is get a little fold in the soft tissue right here at the corner. We're going to come down. We're just going to get a fold right there where the mouth folds back in on itself. The soft tissue folds back. We're coming down. Go ahead and establish that little bit of a lower lip. Again, keeping it nice and flat, right? We want to get that flat surface where it's making contact with the ground. Add on the soft tissue of the chin. There's a little bit of fat down there, so we want to bulge that fat out. And then, now here comes another really kind of tricky part, right? The nostrils. The nostrils, we don't just want to make holes in that orb. The nostrils of a horse are kind of flared and trumpet-like. If you think of I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this. If you think of the horse's skull, we've got that big nasal cavity opening, right? If you've never seen a horse's skull before, go ahead and Google it. They have a huge, huge nasal opening here. I think most of you are probably fairly familiar with the way horse skulls look. So we got this giant nasal opening on our horse skull, right? Now what's that for? The nose itself, the nostrils are all the way down here, right? So how do we get from the nostrils to that crazy nasal opening? What we have is, like I mentioned, sort of a trumpet shape. This nose forms kind of almost like a bugle, like a tube that goes back to that area. So these nostrils then can flare out and widen out the opening. Think of a horse running full speed, and you've probably seen that before, like in movies or photography. When a horse is running full speed, they have those nostrils really widely flared. It's because they're sucking in a ton of oxygen, and that oxygen is going into this giant nasal cavity, which is then going into their lungs and powering those hoofbeats, right? That oxygen, that oxygenated blood, super important. If any of you out there have done any type of serious distance running, you know how important that is. You know, when you get to like a certain point in training for running, you realize that you really have to focus on your breathing because that's where that energy comes from, right? Obviously, the caloric intake is huge, but that oxygenated blood is what's causing those muscles to work. So the horse needs that to happen, and it needs these giant nostrils to fuel that body of theirs. So what we're going to do here is first get rid of our scary, transparent, see-through skeleton horse, and we're going to go ahead and design those nostrils out, just like I was saying, tubes, like tubes. Little trumpets. So I'm going to flare this nostril pretty wide here. Get one nice big flared nostril there. And what we want to do too then is think about the way that it's going back and connecting into that nasal cavity. So we want to have this line come on back here. And again, we can start going ahead and erasing out those construction lines that don't benefit us anymore. If you look really closely in some references, you can see that really nice indication of that kind of that channel the sinuses and nasal cavity take there. So as we come over here, same thing, right? Except this is now turned slightly away from us. So if we're thinking of this as a three-dimensional form with topography, right? We have that little cone that's facing us, and then if we were to turn the cone away from us, we obviously wouldn't see the opening at that point in time, right? That's what's happening over here on this far side. So we're just going to kind of pull up here on the nearest nostril to see the trajectory of where it's meeting in that nasal cavity. And the reason we're doing that is to make sure that both sides are balanced here. So we're pulling up, and then we'll go ahead and pull back out here. Up and out. And then loop it around here. And there we go. And you can already see how that very specific nuance, getting that little bit of a nostril flare there, especially on that far side over here, where we get that really nice overlapping of the forms. It does two things. It really helps to drive home the three-dimensional nature of this drawing, and it's reading as a horse now. It's reading definitively as a horse. It's a very trademark kind of classic iconic look that these animals have, that kind of flared nostril. And it adds a ton of character to them. There we go. Go ahead and apply some value on our planes here. I'm going to go ahead and just break that mouth, get a little bit of the mouth line in there. And just cleaning up these little edges here really fast as we come up to the rest of the face. So there's our muzzle, right? The thing that I want you to really note about this as well, the muzzle as a whole, that is that it is, oh, let me get my red here. It is hanging down past that mandible line. Remember when we established that mandible line that's coming out from underneath the masseter over here? We have the masseter muscle, that muscle at the corner of your jaw. If you were to clench your jaw and put your hand at the corner of your jaw right below your ear, and you feel that bulge, that's what it is on a horse. They have a much higher kind of chewing and bite force than we do, obviously, just looking at that muscle. But coming out from underneath that, we have our mandible, our jawbone. And what you'll note is, as you come over here, it looks like the mouth actually hangs below the mandible. That's what you want to have happen. You want this soft tissue hanging heavy below that mandible. The bite line itself is actually fairly high on the horse. If I were to go ahead and draw the underlying skull on this guy, we'd follow that mandible right on through. And the bite line where the teeth meet is probably right about here. You can see just how far down that soft tissue hangs, that really heavy soft tissue. And that soft tissue is there specifically, again, to manipulate their food. They don't have hands. They can't pick up their food. And if they just had those chomping teeth, what would happen is they'd lose half of it to the ground, right? They'd clip off some grass. What makes it in their mouth makes it in. What makes it out of their mouth doesn't get in their mouth. But since they have this extremely flexible, just giant kind of spongy soft tissue mouth of theirs, they can slurp up all that little grass that they clip off with those lawnmower teeth of theirs. So yeah, you want to make sure that that's hanging below the jawline there. Now, as we go up further, let's go ahead and finish up this ungulate so we can move on to our canids. So as we go up further, I'm just going to go ahead and tweak and refine our shapes a little bit here. Let me get the right size on my stylus. There we go. As we come up, I'm just going to go ahead and play up that masseter muscle a little bit more. Now that we have our muzzle to base things off of, we can more accurately gauge scale. So some areas may need to be enlarged, some areas may need to be dialed back. Change where it needs to be changed. As we come up here, I'm going to go ahead and get more, oh, didn't mean to step back there. I'm going to go ahead and get more subtle on these eyes up here. So first things first, we want to go ahead and get a little bit of that nuance to it. Obviously, it's not just that, paper towel roll shape. It's a little more nuanced than that. So I'm coming in here and getting a little more accurate to our reference, but still using that underlying structure as kind of a guide, right? Like a track. We don't want to go too off the track. We can kind of wiggle side to side on it, right? But we need to kind of stay on that track. As we come in here, we can go ahead and get a little more subtle with that harsh plane that we laid in for the top of the head. We still want to have that established, but it does start to bow a little bit as we go forward in our construction. And different horse breeds, by the way, will have slightly different construction setups for the top of their head. Some might be more domed, some might be more flat. Some might have larger muzzles, some might have smaller, larger masseter muscles, smaller masseter muscles, etc. Just kind of need to watch for those. Very similar to the exercise we did last week in that regard. So if you do have something that has, say, a larger muzzle on it, go ahead and refer back to that week 2 lesson and apply that to the construction forms of the head, because all of those same lessons that we applied to the construction forms of the body work here as well. So what I'm doing here now, really quick, let me go ahead and clean this area up and walk you through the eye construction really fast. What we're doing here with the eye construction, I'm thinking of this almost like a golf ball that has just been kind of stuck in the end of that tube, right? So we have an orb that's there. And what we need to do is carve out of that orb an opening for the eye. We need to basically open up that eye. Now, I like to start off with that orb shape because similar to the muzzle shape, it gives us a form to work around. If you remember when we came down here with the mouth, we utilized the roundness of the shape to help us with that contour of our mouth opening here, right? Where it wrapped around the orb. We're doing the same sort of thing up here with that eye. We have that orb established. Now we're going to go in and just carve our eye in there, our eye's opening into there. And again, different horse breeds are going to have slightly different shaped eyes. Different individuals even may have different eyes. And then the way that they kind of open up is kind of dependent on how they're holding their head, how they're feeling, and all that. You can see right there, we wrap that around that circular form so we can start getting rid of some of those construction lines. And then as we come up here to the side of the head, we can go ahead and wrap that around that orbital mass. Orbital mass is just the term for all the soft tissue and everything that goes into that, that eye structure. Not just the bony area around it, but the soft tissue that makes it up, the entire mass of it. You can see how we're still following our casket shape here at the top, but we're altering it just a little bit. Now as we get towards the very top here, we're going to go ahead and get into our ears. Now I mentioned the ears a little bit last week when we were doing the giraffe. They're not too different on this guy. Again, the runner ungulate form is a you get a lot of nuances and specifics with it, but it's a form that works, so it doesn't switch up too much from one species to the next. Proportions change, little specifics here and there change, but overall structure's fairly similar. All right, now for the ears, what we're going to do, like I said last week, it's kind of like a paper funnel. We're basically doing sort of the same thing we do with the nostrils down here, but stretching it out. If you guys have ever gone to like a county fair or something and gotten those like those candied pecans or whatever, right? And they come in that big paper cone. That's sort of what this is going to look like. This down here is more of a snow cone shape. This is more of a candied pecan or candied almond cup shape. So as we come into here, it's a stretched out paper funnel kind of. Let me get a little darker on that. And then we can kind of pull a little tip off of there. And there we go. Same thing on the other side. Just going to go ahead and open up that funnel. And there we are. Actually, you know what? On that far one, what I'll do, I'm going to pretend that this guy has heard a predator in the background and or something rustling and has flipped that ear the other way. So to do that, real simple. You just want to think of this whole ear shape as rotating, right? So we would be seeing the back side of that instead of the front. So what we get is something that's fairly similar in shape, but maybe a little more rounded in the back. Here's some topography lines to help show you that. They can just flick that off to the side. They just rotate like little satellite dishes, basically. And you'll see when we get to the predator that it's kind of a similar setup. A little wider at the bottom, but a very similar setup. So there it is. There's our ungulate. There's our number one, our prey species ungulate, and how we're going to handle those guys. Let's move on to the canid. So from here, we get a very different head construction. Unfortunately, there's not much that's going to carry over from our horse to our canid. We're just going to have to learn a new structure. There's common things that exist between the two as far as building up your forms and kind of finessing those shapes, but the overall structure and all is drastically different. There's really not much that we can make happen there. So let's see what we've got. For the canid, like I mentioned, forward-facing eyes. That's the big thing here. what we want to do with that is utilize them like so. We can go ahead and start very similar to the horse. We're basically finding our brow line and center line, just like we did with the horse. Except now is where everything goes different. We're going to establish a backward slanting cube or box. Box is more accurate because it's not going to be a perfect cube depending on the species. It'll switch up. But a backward slanting box is absolutely what we want to have happening here. Now, why do we want that there? You'll see. You'll find out in just a moment here. The big reason is to keep those eyes facing forward. What this is doing, it's establishing a front plane here for our head. And if we have a front plane and we put our features on that front plane, right? What happens? These eyes now are clearly pointing forward. They can't slip around to the sides. That forward-facing box keeps those eyes facing forward. Now, as we talked about with our prey species, they have those sideways-facing eyes that give them that wider field of vision, right, where they can spot predators coming in from a greater field of vision. Now, these guys, they don't really have that wide of a range of vision, right? They don't get to see as much as this horse gets to see. They only get this little field of vision in front of them, but they have amazing depth perception because of it. Those forward-facing eyes allow them to use both eyes to focus and get depth perception on their target, which is what you need when you're a predator. When you're chasing another creature down and you need to grab it, whether it's with your paws, your mouth, whatever, or throw a spear at it in our case, or whatever. That's how we evolved the same sort of way. Our forward-facing eyes give us the same sort of benefit. You need that depth perception. You need to be able to see what you're chasing, what you're trying to get. So we established that front plane to keep those eyes there and to make that happen. Now, as we come on down here, what I'm going to do, you're going to see a couple fun things happening right away here. I'm going to lower the top of this box just a little bit. There we go. Now I'm going to go ahead and add on, with utilizing this center line, add on another slanted box. This will be parallel with the box that we just set up. This is going to expand slightly as it goes towards the face. We can now go ahead and start getting rid of the center line, because I'm going to go ahead and bridge it, the center line right here. I'm going to go ahead and bridge it in a moment to our larger box. You'll see. There we go. And you can see it slightly widens as it comes back to the face. I'm going to shorten up the bottom of this box as well. Again, as we start laying in other areas, new areas, we go back and we reassess what we have laid down. Each mark that we lay down is dependent on the previous mark and the next mark that we're laying. So everything needs to be in balance with one another. Perfectly balanced, as nature intended. Points to anybody who can get that quote. But yeah, here's what we're doing here. We're just tweaking these proportions and getting them more in line with one another. There we are. Now, what we can do from here, you can already see where this is going now. Now we're starting to see the basis of a canid here. We're seeing a wolf's head start to emerge. We have our muzzle. We have our cranial mass. And now let's go ahead and lay in our orbital mass here. Orbital mass is going to sit just on and slightly above that brow line that we established, that front plane. So this is going to encompass It's going to stay mostly on the front, but we have a little bit peeking on top. And that's important because what it's going to end up doing is helping us round out that plane and make it feel a little more organic. So this little area right here that goes up on top there, real important. Now what we're going to do next, we can establish our zygomatic arch. They have a very clear zygomatic arch, cheekbones, both canids and felines. Again, it helps them keep those forward-facing eyes. There we are. And you can already see how this is more complex than what we have on the horse. It doesn't mean that it's more advanced. It doesn't mean that it's more evolved or anything like that. There's this misnomer or this misconception as far as evolution goes that there's kind of an end point or certain things are more evolved or better evolved than other things. Now, that's not true. Everything is perfectly evolved for its niche. If the world wasn't, if we didn't have to deal with pollutants and loss of environment and things like that, everything in their niches would kind of be perfectly adapted for those. That's what they're there for, right? That's how they exist. If they're not perfectly adapted, they either adapt or become extinct. So what we get is not things that are more evolved or less evolved. We get things that are just that work for their situation. The terms that we should be using are basal and derived. Derived means derivative, changed, something that is a kind of a copy after the original, right? So derivative, a derived species means that it's changed quite a bit over the millennia, right? Over thousands of years, millions of years. A basal species is something that hasn't changed very much. So things like wolves. Wolves would be a very derived species. They've changed very much over a very short geological time period. Very little change over a very large, very much change over a very short geological time span. Basal species have very little change over a very large time span. So things like sharks, jellyfish, etc. would be more basal species. Anyways, I'm getting on a side tangent about basal versus derived. Let's get back to the wolf head here. What we got going on, like I said, zygomatic arch. And as I mentioned, the eye socket, or the orbital mass coming up just a little bit higher than that plane is helping round that off. What's going to happen up here is a similar process. We're going to come in here and get our ears bridging the gap between the side plane and the top plane. And what that's going to do is help us round it out while still keeping the separation of those planes. So we get kind of a subtle rounding. It's almost like this ear works almost like a little bit of a sanding pad, right? Where we're kind of sanding off the harshness of the corner of that box. We're just kind of taking a sanding pad to that and knocking back the sharpness of that edge. Our sanding pad in this instance being that wolf's ear. So coming in here now, like I mentioned, the predator ears are very similar to prey species ears in the sense that we get that dish, right? But basically what we're doing here is just kind of cutting them off a little bit higher and widening them out at the base a little bit more. They have a wider base there, so it catches a little more sound and whatnot. But it's also a little bit different. It doesn't quite rotate as much as you see on the prey species. And again, creatures use all of these features for multiple things, There's some canids out there that have giant ears like the fennec fox. And yeah, it's using that to help locate prey, but it's also using that to regulate its body temperature. Nature loves to double up when it can, and it will always do so. It takes a lot of energy to try and figure out, over the course of millions of years, to have multiple mutations for one single thing. Nature much rather kind of says, all right, you've already got this. Here's how it can also be used. Same sort of thing on this far ear, where I'm just going to go ahead and turn it, just like we turned the ear on the horse. And you can see it's very similar in shape. So our topography there. And we can really see this wolf coming together now. Now, we're going to go ahead and hop back into the muzzle here on this wolf. On this guy, what we want to do on canines, for canids, with the nose on a canid is similar to the way those ears and those eyes are, except we want to keep the plane on it. So what I mean by that is on these guys, we've got a nose that's going to bridge both the top and the front here. Just like the eye is on the front and the top, front and the side for the ear, the nose is going to bridge those as well. But we're not going to round it off like we're rounding off areas up here. We're not going to help round it off like we are in here. We want to keep this plane separation here, but we need the nose to occur on both of those planes. That's very key. It's very specific to canids. You get that on bears as well, but you don't necessarily get it on a lot of big cats. So it's one of the differences that you're going to see as we jump between the canid and the feline form here. So on the front, dropping down. There we go. And there's our nose. We can go ahead and even modify it a little bit, get a little bit of an arch to the top of that. Different dogs, again, different canids have different shapes to them. Some have that little arch where you're almost like you're kind of extending that front plane into a rounded top, kind of. Others have a little bit different where you're almost extending the top plane into a rounded top. So it would be similar to this. But it's almost always going to be bridging both of those planes. Cool. Now, as we get to those eyes, same sort of thing with our equine. It's not going to change too much from what we were doing there. So we have our orbital mass. All we need to do is just kind of come in here and carve out our eye opening. Same thing on the other side. We'll go right across. We can even draw some rhythms to link those in. There we go. You can see the importance of drawing that zygomatic arch across there. It really shows off how that anchors to the other side of the face. And then from here, come on in and get a little bit of our mouth line in here. Now, canids don't have very much soft tissue on their chin, so you want to keep that fairly close to your construction form on the bottom. They can get kind of jowly here, so we can always pull that off a little bit. The corner of the mouth, it runs, the edge of the mouth is going to run across both planes. We're going to have it almost coming all the way up. And by almost, I mean it is going to come all the way up to where it meets our initial box construction form here. So it's going to run all the way up the side plane of that mouth. Or the mouth is going to run all the way up the side plane of this muzzle. We're still going to come on down here and do a little fold of the soft tissue there. And then if we want to, we can go ahead and get our fun little canid mane in here. Right, the little wolf mane that they get. Go ahead and link that up to the neck. And there we go. There's our... Oh, I stepped back there on accident. Oh well, let me refix that. There we go. There's our little canid form there. We got him all set with those forward-facing eyes. Now, the last one, similar to the canid, we're going to start very, very similar to that, but it's going to change course pretty quickly. And that is our big cat. Now, our big cat, like I said, very similar thing, but we have a little more soft tissue at the front. So with the canid, pay attention to this side plane and how we have the mouth coming all the way up that. That's going to change for the big cat. We'll move a little quicker here on the big cat since we do have a bit of our understanding already established with our canid form. So the basis of these predator head frames and construction forms are going to be the same. We're going to have a box shape, a backward slanting box, right? There we go. We're establishing that. We're going to have our muzzle coming off of here. And now, here's where it starts to change, right? Here's where I want you to fall back on what you learned last week. What we're doing here is I'm establishing that muzzle, but you can see I'm going a little thicker on it, a little wider, and a little shorter, a little more blunt, and a lot wider. There we go. There's the basis for our feline head. And again, very similar to the wolf. We're basically doing what we did last week with the giraffe. We're taking those familiar construction forms, maintaining their integrity, but switching them up just a little bit. Same thing here. We're going to want to get those nice big eyes in there. We can go ahead and get that plane change as well. There we go. This guy will probably end up being similar to a lion or a tiger by the end. There's subtle proportional changes, obviously, that you have between the species. And with this guy being so wide as he is, he's still got a little bit of a longer face, so it might feel a little more leonine than tigerish, but we'll see. So, similar setup here to what we had with our wolf. Let's go ahead and get our ears on this guy. Ears, same concept. We're not changing the idea up much. We're going from the side to the top plane to bridge that, to go ahead and soften up this edge, right? But what we're going to do instead is get ourselves, we're going to get ourselves a rounder ear shape here. Now that's important. Big cats have a different ear shape than our canids do. Canids, for the most part, have a rather pointed ear shape. Again, there's always exceptions to the rule. The only rule with no exceptions is that there's always an exception to the rule. But for the most part, our big cats are going to have rounded ears. Our canids are going to have more pointed ears. We could turn this one as well off to the side. Now I am going to go ahead and alter the side plane just a little bit more on our big cat. Big cats have a little more rounded of a head. So we need to start with that established front plane. Absolutely, because otherwise those eyes are going to slide all over the place. But after that, once we lay down our ear, we're going to soften out that plane change a little bit more than maybe we would with a canid. Canids can stay a little more boxy up there. Big cats get a lot more rounded. And a lot of that has to do with bite force, where we have the muscles, the bite force muscles wrapping up and around the skull. So we get a little more bulging with that. These guys, as ambush predators, again, we want to think about the way these creatures live. For the most part, canids are marathon runners. They're not ambush predators. They run their prey to exhaustion, and by the time they get to their prey can't really fight back, right? In contrast, felines are stalkers. They're ambush predators. They're stalking and they're jumping out and trying to get their prey as quickly as possible. They don't want a prolonged run. They can't do it. They don't have the muscles, as we talked about. They don't have the form, as we talked about, to make that happen. So what they need to do instead is kill that prey fast. Once they get it, it needs to be held onto. So they get these really strong jaw muscles to make that happen, whether it's to hold on or kill or both. So we get that rounding at the top of the head where they wrap up around. So there we go. We're finessing that a little bit. As we come down now to the nose, if you remember, I was talking about the differences in the nose of the canid versus the nose of the feline. Another area that we need to pay attention to. So the nose of the feline is going to occur almost always entirely on that front plane. What we want to do is extend out this top plane just a little bit. And now that that's extended out, let's go ahead and erase out our useless lines here, right? You want to get rid of those marks that are no longer serving a purpose. Now that it's extended out, we can drop a center line here and pull back this little triangle shape. That little trademark cat nose, right? that we all drew as a kid, like in our little notebooks in grade school. There we go. Little trademark cat nose coming down. But you can see here also what I did. I dropped that center line down because the reason we want that, the reason we want to do that is because these big cats, cats in general, felines, have much more pronounced philtrum than we see on canids. Canids, we do get it, right? You do get that little philtrum that drops down from the middle of the nose, that little split line, that line that comes down from the nose to the lip. You see it more on certain species than others. Big cats, you see it really clearly on because of their really defined fat pads, which we're going to get to again in just a moment here. So we're dropping down that center line. It's important for the fat pads that we're about to set up for. So those fat pads, there are two huge pads of fat on each side of the face here. And it's to support a couple of different things. One, it helps with that killing mechanism that they have going on, right? Depending on the species of big cat, they're going to take out their prey in different ways. This one I'm kind of doing a tiger or lion. They're both kind of built a little similar in the face. One's a little longer, one's a little shorter. But they both kill in sort of the same way. They either bite around the throat and kind of crush that larynx there, or they wrap their whole face basically around the nose and mouth and bite there and suffocate. So it's a suffocation process that they're doing. And to get that, they kind of need a little more airtight area happening there. So they have a lot of soft tissue in that spot. The other thing is those fat pads also support those whiskers, which are a sensory organ for these guys. It helps them sense their environment a little bit. So we need to establish those fat pads in there in a greater way than we did necessarily with the canines. Canines have whiskers, they have fat pads, but not to the extent that big cats do. So you can see what I'm doing here, though. I'm not just going in here and drawing in a really big round shape on the side. We're curving it. We're wrapping it around here. So what I like to think of it as is almost like we have our construction form, right? We have our box, and then we're kind of taking a big wad of clay and sticking it on there and smoothing it across that surface. We have a big round wad of clay that we're bridging the gap between the front plane and the side plane with, but it's still maintaining the structural integrity beneath it. This is why it's so important to practice these construction forms, because there are layers, literal layers, built on top of these creatures, and each layer is affected by the layer underneath it. So we need to build up these forms very slowly, especially on something like a big cat, where we have so much soft tissue working to kind of confuse our eyes and make it a little tough for us. All right, so there we go. We got our fat pads established. Now, it just gets crazier from here, guys. These big cats are nuts as far as the soft tissue on the front of their faces go. So the next thing that we need to establish on them, soft tissue chin. We're going to go ahead and build out a nice big soft tissue chin. I always think of the Disney animations. They do a great job of this, the Disney character designers, of doing this with their big cat characters, whether it's Scar from The Lion King or what was his name, the prince from Robin Hood. He was also a fantastic design. Shere Khan from Jungle Book. All of them had that really big pronounced chin. And they also have this nice sweep line that comes in right here, right? That's key to big cats as well, and I'm going to show you how to get that sweep line in there. So we've got our soft tissue jaw. I'm going to erase out now the construction line above that because it's starting to read like a mouth, right? And we don't want that to read as the mouth. We haven't put the mouth in just yet. Let's go ahead and get that in here. All right. That's the right stylus weight. There we go. So as we come down here, we have our philtrum. The philtrum's great because it allows us to find a really wonderful sync up and breaking point for that mouth. So just like the canid, we're coming down at first and we're going to wrap around here, right? But here is where those similarities end. I'm going to go ahead and erase out this area just really quickly. So pretty much as soon as you turn the corner here on a big cat, and again, it's going to vary from big cat to big cat. For things like lions and tigers, for things like jaguars, you're going to get this little bit of a fold here. Jaguars a little less than lions and tigers. For things like cheetahs, mountain lions, and the like, you're not going to see this so much. But the heavier big cats have this fold that happens right in here. It comes across the side of the face, and then we get this little fold that happens right here at the corner, right? Similar to the fold that we have here, similar to the fold that we have here. But it's almost as soon as we turn on this, as soon as we come off of the front plane and turn onto the side plane, we want to go ahead and get that soft tissue fold in there, that little dip of the mouth in there. So let me show you a little more clearly how that's happening. Coming down, around to the side, folding under itself and back over. Coming back up, we'll get a little bit of the lip sometimes here that we can see. And then it goes off to the other side. So it keeps that mouth situated towards the front of the face. The opening itself, so the jaw itself, the bite line, right? It goes all the way back, just like it does on the horse, just like it does on the wolf. But we need our soft tissue opening to be situated fairly far towards the front so it can get that that little bit of a murder vacuum seal that it needs to take out its prey, right? So to do that, the mouth stays up here. We get that little fold at the corner, and then we get this trademark sweep, right? The next thing we're putting in is a bunch of soft tissue here. So from the corner of the mouth to this corner here of our construction form, we are going to get a stretch, a soft tissue stretch in there. And we can go ahead and then erase out the construction form underneath. So we get our soft tissue stretch going back there. What is this connection point back here? Now, this on the side of the face is exactly the same as what we have here. It's the masseter muscle of our big cat. So we can go ahead and play up and round out that masseter muscle a little bit more now. That bite muscle, that big jaw muscle. We'll do this as a female so you can kind of see the structure here and not have it obscured by a mane or anything like that. And come on down here. I'm going to drop this a little more vertically. We still want that big soft tissue chin though jutting out. And then as we come up here, I'm just going to tweak some of these angles a little bit. I'm going to bow the top of the muzzle just a little bit. Let me clean up this chin. It got a little sloppy down there. And I'm going to go ahead and just lighten up those fat pads so we have a little more clarity to that section. There we go. That's feeling better. Whisker lines wrapping around. Keeping that nose on the front of the face there. Have the side of the face dip in, then bulge out as it comes to that fat pad. And as we come up here, I'm going to go ahead and just get rid of some of these construction lines here. And let's go ahead and give him some real eyes instead of these horrifying goggles that we've got him wearing right now, or her wearing. All right, so eyes, same sort of thing that we did before. We're just going to come in here and carve out an opening on our orbital mass. There we go. And there we go. There's our big cat for us. Our little lioness right here. Go ahead and play up that bulge of the orbital mass here a little bit as it comes onto the cranial mass. Those ears are a little tiny. I'm going to bulk them up a little bit. If this were a drawing like just on a pad of paper, you know, I just erase those out and draw them again. And like I said, that's something that is, when you notice it, just change it. It's no biggie. Everything is relative to its neighboring parts, so something's going to need to be changed or replaced at some point in every drawing. So whenever you see something like that, always switch it up. There we go. Now, to give this a little bit of a fantasy twist, if you were looking to do that, um, felines are one of my favorite things. Just really quick, felines are one of my favorite things to kind of play up from a conceptual standpoint to utilize as a basis for something like a dragon or something like that. So I just threw another layer on here. And what I like to do with these guys is almost use that same head construction, right? But then what we can do, let me get rid of those ears now. What we can do is maybe give him more of a reptilian nose. Give her a bit more of a reptile profile with that nose. Get rid of the mammalian nose. Maybe we can pull her mouth back here. We can keep maybe that mammalian front bite to it, but pull it back into almost a reptilian kind of bite line going all the way back. Likewise, we can come on down here and maybe throw some fun hornlets and things down. So you can see how already, like this is just, I'm not even really creature designing, right? This is just me really fast doodling here more than anything else. I'm just doodling on top of a construction form. So you can see how just utilizing these construction forms alone can already give us like some really cool options for creature design. This is why it's so important to study real world animals, so important to understand actual construction and stuff for your creature designs, for your concept stuff. I've had people before be like, oh, I just want to be a concept artist. I don't really need to study anatomy. I don't need to know construction and everything. I want to make stuff up. It's like, well, yeah, but your made up stuff needs to feel believable. And the way it feels believable is by finding that recognizable kernel in there, right? That little nugget in there that speaks to the viewer where they say, oh, okay, that reads as predatory, or that reads as, not predatory or prey species, or that reads as a canid, that reads as a feline. Like you want to get those feelings from the viewer. You want them to instantly say that's a predatory creature, or that's a docile creature. And the way that you get that happening is by pulling on subtle cues that they themselves, that the viewer themselves might not even be aware of, that they may not even know that they know. But this structure will resonate as a predatory structure to people because they've seen this structure time and time again, whether they know it or not. There'll be something there that they can't quite place their finger on, but they know it makes them feel a certain way, right? As we come up here, we can even, just change those, maybe get some fun little hornlets above the eyes. You get a little more angular in those eyes as well. Still keeping that forward-facing gaze so it stays nice and predatory feeling. Maybe we can throw some horns down here in the zygomatic arch even. Coming up, switching up those ears, getting rid of the ears entirely. And instead foregoing them for, a set of draconian horns. Let's come on in here and throw a crest up there, a frill, a ridge of some sort coming down. Nice thick draconic neck here too. Scales. Right? And all of a sudden, our big cat just became a dragon, and we didn't change the structure at all. That structure stayed entirely the same. You saw how all that I did was essentially the same as adding that soft tissue that we would add if this were, the chin on a feline, right? We start with those construction forms, build out the soft tissue of the chin. It's no different here. We're starting with those construction forms and now building out the soft tissue or these horny growths in different areas on top of our already existing construction forms. So that's kind of how you would modify these sort of lessons to work for you guys in illustration or work for you in concept design. Likewise, the way that we modified this is a way that you can modify it for real-world creatures as well. You can see how I modified it to make it into a dragon. Those subtle proportional shifts, those little changes, are things that we can do to, say, the prey species form, to take that from a horse into a gazelle, slim up that snout. Give it more of a browser's tip to the nose. Browser's tip to the nose. Give it horns, longer ears, but keep the integrity of those construction forms. It'll work. It'll give you a different species. And there's just so much versatility to these shapes. So that's today's lesson. I hope you all enjoyed it. For the homework assignment, what I would like all of you to do today is go ahead and you have two pieces of reference. You have three pieces of reference today. Please go ahead and choose one of those pieces of reference. No need to draw all three. You have three pieces. Pick one out of those and go ahead and do essentially what we're doing here, a little bit of a construction drawing. You are free to take those references and alter them as you'd like. Now, one of the things that you're going to notice about those references, they are all almost entirely in profile. That's on purpose. I want you all to turn these profile views into a 3/4 view. So do a construction drawing at a 3/4 view of these of one of these animals. You don't have to pick out all three, but just one, and make it a nice construction drawing, right? Go ahead and streamline it, kind of like what we did here. Or if you feel you're up to it and feeling a little more conceptual, you can do something like we did with the dragon here as well. But go ahead, like I said, pick those, turn them into a 3/4 view like you're seeing here, and utilize the reference to make it happen. All right? So it's going to be a little challenging, a little tricky, but that's how we build our skills. That's how we are able to, become imaginatomists. I just made up another made-up word off of an already made-up word. But no, that's how we learn how to modify these forms and how we go a little further with our designs. So get out of your comfort zones a little bit. Try to figure out how to turn these forms in space and have fun with it, everybody. All right, thank you all, and I will see you all next week. Take care, everyone.